What's going on, Soul Tribe? I salute the divinity in you, and welcome to my channel, Alchemist. Justin here, and bringing that little nugget to add to the Soul Tribe archive. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about Mercury in Leo in the 8th house, and this is an interesting one for Mercury to be in. Now, when you talk about Mercury, you're doing one of the functions already. Mercury kind of governs our communication and our speech, how we critically think and intelligence. It can be practical wisdom and understanding. Mercury can deal even with like siblings, youth, play. There's so many. There's even a divinatory aspect to Mercury as far as like bird diviners, or it could be even like dream interpretation, things along those lines. Mercury is how we take those inspirations and things that we get from the source and able to articulate it, and to put those abilities to use. So yeah, very important placement when you're working with Mercury. And then when you're talking about Leo, Leo is ruled by the sun, and they are the fixed fire sign, and they are active or yang in nature. And the thing about Leo, that fire energy is the will, that thing that fuels us. And with them being that fixed fire sign, that will can be in just a steady flow. But what the thing with Leo is, you have to pay attention to what's fueling that fire, what's circulating through that energy, because you want to find things that brighten you up, especially with them being ruled by the sun, because when Leo is shining at its brightest, I mean, who's not attracted to the warmth of the sun? Like there's this very generous energy, that comes with Leo. It's a very giving, very, very warm energy. And then when you talk about the 8th house, now this in ancient astrology was known as the idle or the inactive house. And some of the themes, and this is one of those not so favorable houses. Now, because some of the themes that it's going to cover will be like death, inheritances, the monies, and kind of possessions of others. This can deal with debts. It can deal with any sort of like lawsuits. It can deal with any sort of like assets, and then just like any sort of energies behind that. But also too, there's a bit of an oracular, or not an oracular, or a more sort of like occultish side of the 8th house as well, that I've been really noticing in a lot of 8th house placements. So we'll talk about that here in a moment. But when you're working with this placement, a couple of things to consider. You would have a Capricorn rising by whole sign. Yes, you have a Capricorn rising by whole sign. And you're going to want to look to the sun, because the sun is going to be responsible for just this house. And then you're going to want, for Mercury is going to import the themes of the 6th house to this house, which is going to be like accidents, illnesses, subordinates, work, things like that. And then the themes of the 9th house, which is going to deal with like foreigners, foreign travel. It can deal with education, and it can deal with sort of like spirituality, and just kind of like in general things like that. But so one thing that I would talk about with this placement, we can go ahead and get the death thing out of the way. It doesn't just mean that there's going to be death around you, or there might be, because maybe that's one that you go for your education for. Maybe you decide to be some sort of like, maybe you want to be a mortician, maybe, or you want to do something in nursing, or you want to be a surgeon, or you want to be, maybe maybe a butcher. Those are some occupations that were associated with the 8th house as well. Maybe some sort of like detective work, things like that. That might be where death might be a common theme around you. Working with people who get into like accidents, working with people with different illnesses, things like that. So when you're working with this would be one where those themes do weigh heavy on the mind after a while. And I would say, especially with having Leo there, just make sure to take some time where you can kind of decompress from that, kind of really sort of process this thing. Maybe even looking at different, if that's something where you find yourself wrestling with sometimes. I think questions of mortality come up from time to time, and I think that's just a very natural part of the human experience. But I think that looking at maybe even different cultures and seeing how there are cultures out there that celebrate death. That again, it is something to celebrate. I mean, that would be odd if there was not. So there's there can be a lot of growth in that, and I think that this can be a really nice placement because I can see this as one that can really help people maybe through their real kind of vulnerable times, even when they're having this place where they're feeling challenged, where their faith is feeling challenged, especially when faced with, that sort of like, again, faced with death, with illnesses, with accidents, things like that. That's a very sensitive time. So this could be someone who creates that kind of warm space, who can create the some sort of like effective dialogue to help people kind of process through these things to make it more of a healthy sort of relationship with just, again, the natural process of life. So, I think a really kind of a lot of nice things can come out of that. But great kind of healing work can come from this. But even kind of speaking on that sort of like occultish side of it, there could be, and even like sort of, I was reading where with Mercury, with Mercury being associated with like bird divination, maybe you may find that like ancestors are communicating to you with bird sound or with different signs. I remember someone telling me a story once about a friend who passed who had this affinity for peacocks, really just kind of loved them. And she was the girl who was looking for a gift and was driving and saw a peacock on the top of a house and pulled over for a second and then goes to get outside and then finds the thing that she was looking for. And so some sort of, pay attention to those sort of like coincidences and things like that, and dabble in that energy safely when we're talking with birds. But really, I think that there's something they're having in occult studies. There's a little, I think, especially for this placement, considering that the sun rules it, there's this exercise that I do that it's called the adorations of the sun. It's called the Libra Resh, and you honor the four phases of the sun: the rising, the high noon, the setting, and the midnight hour. And you don't have to be exactly on those times, but making it a regular practice each day to honor that. Look into that, and see what kind of relationship you form with it. It can be, Aleister Crowley who had wrote about the Libra, had mentioned that it's something that can help you to make that where you don't fear death. And I think that it just gives you where you're more active in the journey, where you're more focused on, it brings you more grounded in the present. And having those sort of like rituals, considering again that Mercury rules that sixth house, that is incorporated in your routine, is going to just be, great in the long run. And that's another thing too that I would look into, looking into where we're trying to prevent death. We're trying to prolong this life as we're trying, let's change that. We're trying to promote life. And so that would be something where I would look into different ways of taking care of the body, considering Mercury rules one of the houses that, but I mean, it is in the, well, more so in one of the houses that deal with the body, And so that would be something where looking to different herbs, looking to just like holistic practices on top of, sort of like modern medicine, like all of that stuff. Have a regular relationship with the doctor, healer, things along those lines. Now, another thing that I want to talk about, that there's a lot of law that's even kind of correlated between the 8th house and the ninth house that Mercury rules. So maybe there might be something where you're doing something with lawyers. Maybe you're like people who deal with like the car accidents, for example, like who help people fight cases for that, or doing any sort of like, maybe they're sort of like fraud, negligence claim, any sort of things that lawyers do. That could be something where that you're getting an education with that, where you have an ongoing education with that, with that sort of like ninth house themes that are coming through there. So that could be another really useful placement. Working with other people's money, that's something where Mercury is very mercantile, obviously, but Mercury can deal with like profit and things like that, commerce. So that would be something where maybe you do something with stocks, maybe you do something in accounting, maybe you do something with anything where maybe you just manage the taxes of just like your family or things like that. Just like have some sort of relationship where you have an active participation in your assets, whatever that looks like, whether you're sharing with friends, whether you're sharing. And that's where I like to talk about that 8th house too, just of sharing in general, especially with Leo, how much you give, especially when people are going. It's one thing to want to, just give, help and heal and all that great stuff, but you have to be mindful too of how that weighs on you over time. where you get known as sort of like the go-to, and where I think Leo has stamina, that doesn't mean that's how you should expend it all the time. But yeah, that could be a really sort of great thing that you could be, find yourself being a really natural at, and you put that energy into that with Leo. Shoot, just that's going to be would be really impressive. I think the sort of like money management that you could do with this placement. So maybe working with other people's, like, going back even to the lawyer thing, working with other people as far as like dealing with inheritances, possibly. Maybe inheritance is something that you happen to think about. Mercury deals with, with siblings as well, so maybe that might come into play. But those are, I can kind of talk on and on about this, but those are just some sort of general things that I would just kind of explore with someone who has this placement. You definitely need the whole chart to get an idea of what is going on in this placement. But if you have this or know someone who's working with this placement, down in the comment section, let us know if you feel comfortable talking about that, of course. And because it's really cool to see those energies come to life. I've been meeting a lot of eighth house people as of late. Like that's been a very constant theme in my in my journey, interestingly enough. But it's a really fascinating house, so that is something where, if that's something you want to explore a little bit more, or a lot more, whatever that's looking like, then down in the description box I have the prices of my services and a link for my email if you have any sort of questions about the sort of things that I want to provide, whether you want to talk about, set up any sort of like maybe you're setting up a business, maybe you're getting ready to purchase a home, maybe you're getting ready to move, maybe you're wanting to start some sort of relationship. This can sort of help kind of pick some auspicious days, not to necessarily lock down a thing, but to help give it a little extra oomph, give it some extra support. When you're planning a picnic, if you're going to plan it for, if it's going to rain versus it's going to be sunny, we're going to aim for that sunny day if we can help it. So, that's one thing. Or we can work as far as just like if you're coming up on an annual perfection year, then maybe Mercury's the time lord for you. Then that's something that we can definitely get into as well. Or just working with the natal chart in general, or whatever you're kind of looking for. And I also offer tarot and I Ching services as well. Now, also on this channel, there is a playlist for the lunar shenanigans, and that just talks about the lunar astrology, everything that's going on there, what sign it's in, what phase it's in, what aspects it's forming, how that affects the general population, and how you can relate to the moon. Understanding how it travels helps develop a tight relationship with the moon, and I think everyone can benefit from that. But also too, there is another one for Celestial News Weekly, and that's the playlist that's under. And it talks about just like the weekly transits between the sun and the other planets, and yeah, just like what sign they're working in, what placements are going to be impacted, and how to work with those energies as practically as possible. So that's all available for you. But enough chit chat. Until next time, stay mindful out there. Keep raising that vibration through the roof, and I will catch you on the next one. Later.